Hello, and welcome to Rocket Fuel, your daily update for everything that's happening in the Rocket Pool community. Today is October 31st. It's Halloween, and my god, it's been a horror of a day. So normally on Mondays, these last few weeks, what I've been doing is filming an update for the whole weekend. However, I'm not doing that today because there is so much content to go through. So today's episode is going to be like a mammoth, gargantuan episode. I'm fairly sure of that. So I guess you can see by the runtime, I don't know what that's going to be, obviously. So a lot of the content that was going to go into this weekend's episode has been postponed to tomorrow's episode. So today's episode is about one topic and one topic only, and that topic is the governance vote for the maximum collateral for less ETH bonded mini pools. Those are the mini pools you'll start being able to make from about January that only need 8 ETH of collateral. So before we get started, Object shared this message with me on Friday, I think. So I was saying that, I'm trying to I asked people in the Rocket Pool thread, do you want me to just relay the facts, be like a newscaster? Do you want me to put my own opinion in there? How much of that do you want? So that's the comment I made. Because a quick question: how much of my own opinion do you want to see in Rocket Fuel? Yesterday I talked about how flat 24 is my preference for the LEBs. Would you rather I kept my opinion out of the episodes, or is it okay to include it? And then Ment said, I have no problem hearing your opinion. It's your show. Marcy says it's a balance, no doubt. Nobody wants to hear anything too preachy, but I think it's fair to say, here's my opinion, and here's the general opinions, here's my opinion. I think that's a good balance. And Object made a really good point, which I want to talk about right now. He said, if you decide to include your opinion, you need to disclose your bias, which I did not do. So let me be clear about that. He said, you're amongst just 8% of node operators over 150% collateral who would financially benefit from 24 ETH max. The vast majority, 92% of node operators are under 150%, over 55% are under 50% collateral. And would get less rewards because of 8% node operators would get more. From your point of view, 24 ETH max might be acceptable compromise, but I don't think any unbiased observer would call a decision that benefits only 8% of people a compromise at all. So that's a fair statement by Object. At the time, I was over 150% collateralized. I'm no longer 150% collateralized. So that was that. So let's get that out of the way. So I do have a financial interest in that position, but I think just, the opposite of that would be someone who has less collateral might be pushing for the LEB max collateral to be 12, the node operator ETH, and that might be their financial decision as well, which is fair. So, everybody has to act in the interest of the protocol or their own financial interest, and both I think are legitimate perspectives. However, it might be that, I think it's better to put the protocol first, but that's besides the point. So let's get that out of the way. So today's episode will be following kind of a narrative arc, and it's going to follow Joe over the course of the weekend. And Joe, if you're watching this, I'm really sorry. I don't mean to pick on you. The reason why I'm following that is because Joe's vote basically shows a kind of path that has happened this weekend and over the weekend, and I think it really paints a picture of what kind of happened over the weekend and how things went. So Joe, I'm sorry that it's I'm picking on you, but I'm not picking on you. I'm just using it as an example. So let's go with that. So this was a few days ago, and Joe says, in my attempts to not influence the voting, I appear to have influenced the voting. Disaster. So that was on Friday at 2 in the afternoon, but I think that was let me think. Sorry, I'm not sure if that's about the GMC vote or this vote. I think that was about the GMC vote. I'm so sorry about that. I should have curated my links better. That's supposed to be in tomorrow's episode. Oh, okay. This was yeah, this was a comment from Joe. Like, let's start from here. So this is, so I'm trying to take a very broad view of things, and in my opinion, this conversation can really boil down to how much do we want to support speculation within Rocket Pool, and does speculation count as being healthy for the protocol? My view takes a lot of things into account beyond that, but those things didn't seem to matter to many people. So let me try to tackle the first. If we can get beyond that, I'll talk about the other aspects. So at this point, Joe had voted for flat 24 ETH as the maximum collateral for LEB 8s. He says, in terms of speculation, there are a few extremes. No speculation is useless, and we shouldn't support. No, speculation is useless, and we shouldn't support any of it at all. This would be like stake 2.4 ETH RPL as both the minimum and the maximum, no range. We tolerate a minimum amount because we have to. 2.4 to 12 ETH. We tolerate some, which may be too much, but whatever. 2.4 to 24 ETH. Go ham on it, I don't care. 2.4 to 36 ETH. The extremes being 1 and 4. So looking at the raw numbers here. And he says there's 18.9 million RPL in existence. 7.47 is staked, about 40%. 7.28 is effectively staked, about 38%. 6.47 is new and not being used for anything, new RPL, so version 2. 11.4 is combined old and new, not being used. So that's about 60% is not being used. From the perspective of people aren't holding excessive RPL that could be put into mini pools, you're looking at a very small number. It's not negligible, but it's small, and that particular point seems to be generating most of the controversy. Most RPL in existence not being used for anything, so I'm lumping into the speculation category. I have a concern that if we demonstrate a proclivity for punishing speculation as much as reasonably possible, because we don't believe in it, it will result in a lot of sells. When that happens, I worry that massive volatility and subsequent failure to recover is going to turn a lot of would-be stakers off the protocol. We're asking them to swap 2.4 ETH out of 10.4 into RPL, and that makes it feel like they're not going to make it back. I worry it's not going to have the desired effect of making lots of mini pools possible. Basically, people who are already in will already be in or exit. Most of the people will look at CoinGecko price chart, nope the F out, and do something else. So then he says this has follow-on issues too, like it makes it harder for the PDAO to afford things, like for example RPL incentives to boost liquidity, which RETH obviously successfully done. I don't know about, and then Zero says by this logic, it seems like we're under the control of whales, like until Rocket Pool dies. And Joe says, I don't know about going that far, but right now less than 40% of the tokens actually staked. So I mean, whales make up a massive portion of the game. So that's kind of like where we stood overnight on. And then look at Joe says, if you actively take a fuck the whales approach, which I have seen promoted, I think that's detrimental. So this was Saturday night, Sunday morning. So at this point, Joe was kind of like arguing the reason why he's voting flat 24. Then Waldorf says yours is a novel argument. So Waldorf, on Friday I talked about kind of like the different camps that were emerging and like where the main argument stemmed from. And Waldorf was one of the proponents of node operator ETH being the maximum, and that was maximum 12 ETH per mini pool. So Waldorf says yours is a novel argument. Essentially, there is perceived value loss which may result in dumping. I believe there is truth there, but I have two counters. One, per your numbers, over 60% of currently held RPL is purely speculative and not gaining yield. This lines up with my intuition that yield on the 10% per year scale has little impact on speculative token that is A, expected to rise a great deal in the speculative thesis, and B, varies by 10% on the week, month scale, or day scale, even more than that. The bar of perceived X is too dangerous to respect. I want to support our speculators. I believe they add value. In a case where I can't see the value of a decision, I can't support it just because large holders claim it has value. If I did, I would simply copy vote whales routinely. In that case, governance is broken. I can't support this line of thinking. More separately, seeing those numbers makes me think about the loose RPL. We could incentivize RPL liquidity, etc. to generate value for both the protocol and the speculative holders. So the conversations are going back and forth. This was a few hours later that Waldorf was replying to Joe, but Joe got back to him a little while later. He says we could incentivize RPL liquidity to generate value for both the protocol and speculative holders. So that's what Joe was talking about. As a quick note, I think it's very important to take away from this whole deal, and I agree with it. I also agree with Noshua that anything more than the minimum RPL would be easier to digest if it was used front and center for insurance against poor performance, MEV theft, whatever else, rather than backstopping it. Doing that requires more liquidity though, as you yourself have pointed out. Taking another shot at this, one of the lines I had was, this is one of like 5 reasons I voted for it, and I sat on the others because it was already a big point. But another less popular one is that the team tends to have lots of inertia when it comes to making changes, and having flat 24 and the LEB4 world means a mini pool can be up to 100% collateralized, which looks good for our ETH if the RPL is actually being used as collateral. With NETH, the maximum collateral will be 10 ETH, 6 plus 4. I think he meant 20. I'm not sure exactly what the number, how he gets that 10 ETH number there, on 28 borrowed instead of 28. Being able to say that our ETH is 100% backed by collateral is useful in itself. That being said, this is another play into reading the tea leaves, so I get why people don't want to hear it. So then, Patches says, isn't max 8 plus 12 for NETH, which is right. And then Joe says it isn't, and then Patches says 20 not 10, and Joe says I know. So Joe says he's thinking of LEB4s 150%. So that's 10. So we like, that kind of went aside a little bit, but the point stands about the team wanting to be able to market our ETH as 100% collateralized. We'll talk about the quality of the collateral. So then Joe comes back and says, here's the world I'm imagining. RPL has a lot of liquidity, so using it as collateral is acceptable. RPL is used as collateral for underperforming nodes or misconfigured nodes that end up hurting our ETH holders, where the amount of RPL staked is more than 10%, could be 40%, 50%, 100%, whatever. RPL's APR doesn't suck, so people are incentivized to actually stake it more than the bare minimum. The bare minimum for LEB8 is 30%, so it's 2.48. 2.4 out of 8, and for LEB4 it's 70%, 2.8 out of 4. I think most people will hang out well above those to hedge against price drops, bringing them below the minimum and thus not collecting on rewards. Our ETH being able to stay up to 100% collateralized instead of 35% collateralized is important, even though it's not actually 100%. It's more than 35%, and I think the delta matters. So, having any collateral is better than competition, isn't it? Yes, but having more is better than less. That's a comment from A35U, and then Joe replied, and then Invis, he said, I disagree, we have to pay for it, and who's paying it? The RPL would be, which contradicts at least point C you mentioned. RPL's APR doesn't suck, so people are incentivized to actually stake more than the bare minimum. So I guess Invis is saying that if the whales just staked more, then the rewards would go down, which would make it less attractive for people to actually stake with Rocket Pool. And then Joe says, I suppose the speculators will be paying for it because they're not getting any of the inflation. So let's move on. Yeah, and then Joe says there is the rip the band-aid philosophy, but I'm not there yet. And people saying like it's not a waste of time for you to be sharing your opinion. So this is a good time for me to talk about why Joe was hesitant to share his opinion. I think what happened is any time over the weekend, whenever people mentioned a position, especially people mention in trading, especially people who mentioned a flat 24 or a PETH position, a lot of people would try to convince them that their arguments were wrong, and that's fine. That worked for a bunch of people, did change their perspectives. But I think Joe at one point said, I don't want to talk about this because I'm going to get dogpiled on, which just means that, people are going to start like not ganging up on him necessarily, but like questions after question and trying to get him to explain certain things. And I think he just didn't want that confrontation. I don't mean to be putting words in Joe's mouth, so I'm sorry if I am, Joe. but that's just what, like, he actually used the word stockpile, right? So then Charles VI says, I understand since you have put in a lot of love and care into this, the part that's less comfortable for me is that because withdrawals are not enabled, I'm held hostage alongside the protocol by Wales. Not to be too histrionic, I read this project via the philosophy behind it on places like ETHStaker, and I believe in it as a concept. And then Joe says, one thing I'd like to explore more is collateral too expensive to be worth it? Is that true? For an entity like Lido, sure, but for us, I think collateral has its uses because the landscape of stakers is so diverse. So what does collateral mean? Now, collateral means that if something went wrong with your node, then first your ETH would be taken, and then secondly, your RPL would be taken. Now, on a singular basis, that makes sense, right? Like you, if the person got slashed or if they did something really, really bad, which is extremely unlikely that this would happen, but if they did something really, really bad, then they would lose their 8 ETH that they put through in LEB, and then they would lose their 12 ETH that they put in LEB. But then if the mini pool lost more than 20 ETH, then the rest of the ETH would start coming out of the RETH pool, and it would hurt their rewards basically. So what the collateral does is, if there's issues, then you can use the RPL as to be able to even sell the RPL. So the first 8 ETH, that's fine. The second 12 ETH worth of RPL, that is you'd be able to sell it, right? You'd be able to swap it for ETH on the market quite easily. However, the only situations in which a lot of people would get slashed at the same time and that RPL would be needed, okay, let me slow down a little bit. So the majority of slashings that take place on Ethereum since the Beacon chain launched is when people used their keys in two places at the same time. So they had their node running on one computer, then they turned it on another computer and ran a node with the same keys. Now that got them slashed. The punishment for that is 1 ETH. So that would easily be taken out of their ETH for their mini pool, right? There are very rare situations in the protocol, in the Ethereum protocol itself, where people would get slashed for more than that. They'd either have to be doing something malicious, or there'd have to be a lot of people getting slashed at the same time, or they'd have to do something called quadratic leaking, where a whole lot of people are offline at the same time, and then their punishment starts getting higher because of that. Now, the chances of that happening are pretty low, but not impossible. And the chances of that happening to a lot of people in the Rocket pool are quite low as well, because we've got great client diversity. A lot of people using different combinations. The chance of quadratic leaking are quite low. The chance of some mass slashing event is quite low. So the chance of needing more than 8 ETH as collateral is very low. So then the question becomes what is the 12 ETH of RPL for, right? In some extreme situation, you can use that as collateral. But if there's a black swan event, then you'd literally would need hundreds of thousands, if not millions of RPL worth of liquidity to be able to swap it for ETH and pay those people back, pay the RETH holders back as using it as collateral. However, the market that we have for RPL just cannot support that level of sales. Is too illiquid. So this is what Joe's kind of talking about. He says, one thing I'd like to explore is the idea of collateral is too expensive to be worth it. Is that true? So then a few weeks ago when we were doing the RETH incentives, we were talking about how, providing such and such amount of RPL tokens every month, I think it's $80,000 worth, 3,500 tokens, I think, something like that. 3,500 tokens, or 3,250. That will give us enough incentives to get 60,000 RETH as in liquidity, right? That's incentives will lead to that much. So the incentives needed to bring millions of RPL into liquidity would be astronomical. So let's get to that next, because Val went and crunched the numbers, right? He says being able to say 100% collateralized would be very significant for marketing. Being able to say maybe up to 100% collateralized if people feel like it isn't significant in my opinion. We'd either have to mislead people, not okay, or end up explaining just the minimum that's assured. The same across current proposals. Obviously, we can't raise the minimum to require full collateralizations. That would be strictly worse than solo staking at maturity. Apologies for dogpiling. I totally get how that can be off-putting. I hope you can tell from my response that I'm actually considering your points and not just starting by assuming you're wrong. So then Val went off and Yeah, and Joe said being able to, like, maybe up to 100% collateralized isn't significant, and Joe says that I think that's a fair point. And then Val went and crunched the numbers. Let me see if I have those numbers. Yeah, okay, here we go. So Val says, point one, I talked about liquidity here, and then there's a comment. He says the upshot is we need 3.5 times our liquidity to liquidate even half our mini pools at current minimum collateral 10%. More importantly, we need to have liquidity completely change forms to something that allows for auctions to always act first. Liquidity providers wouldn't be able to exit positions, and node operator users wouldn't be able to trade RPL for ETH. If that's the case, then we'll simply be front run. To give an idea of how expensive this would be, it's currently costing us 7,200 RPL a month to get a 12,000 increase in our ETH liquidity. So, sorry, my numbers were wrong. I think that was the minting that many ETH. Maybe, I'm not sure where that was wrong. Sorry about that. Or maybe I was right and I'm not understanding this. So it says RPL liquidity is more expensive twice. It has impermanence loss risk, and it doesn't provide its own yield to add APR. I guess it's 5 times more expensive. I'm not sure how much more expensive liquidity is if we tell liquidity providers you must give us the option to rug you, but I suspect it's a lot more expensive, e.g. an order of magnitude. And let's use Marcy's conservative column to get some idea of how much ETH we're talking about when we're a bit more mature. And then there's a link to Marcy's spreadsheet, and it says that's 7 times increase in our ETH total value locked. On the flip side, RPL value should go up versus ETH. So let's use the 0.068. So that's 5x from here, from the same column in the spreadsheet. So that's a 4.4 increase in value versus ETH. Well, now it's a bit more. This is very rough, but it should give us some idea. To get the 5k we need, just liquidate the current minimum. That gets 5,000 ETH. That gives us 7,200, and then there's like math, and equals 200. Here's the math. I'm highlighting on the screen. Equals 239,000 RPL per month. That's how much we'd have to pay as a collateral if we want to liquidate. If we want to be able to liquidate the collateral. So I think what the point Val is making here is that this is just not possible. It's just too much. We can't afford that. He says, for perspective, inflation for the last month was 70,600 total. That includes the shares going to PDAO, ODAO, node operators, everyone. So let's see what happens next. Next we have Calurduran comes up, and this was last night. He says, I can't resist lukewarm take before going to bed. Having had trading open all day, I've come to the conclusion that a lot of folks need some fresh air and some perspective. This is our first contentious vote. Yes, it won't be our last. On a scale of 1, how many shoeies does math have to do every week, to 10, minimum collateral? Maybe this is a heck of a lot closer to 1 in importance than 10. If every vote that isn't unanimous is going to involve people fighting for the spirit of Rocket Pool or whatnot, then eventually everyone is just going to get exhausted and leave. People disagree with you on the internet, but this doesn't have to become some XKCD comic. They are still members of the community, and they still want to see Rocket Pool succeed, even if they think there's a different path here. So I really like that comment. I gave it the emoji responses. I'll give it the other ones as well. I think that was a really fair take, because for me personally, I was trying to keep up with everything that was happening, and it just got to be too much. And yeah, it was too much, and I couldn't keep up with it, and it was really difficult for me to keep up with it. And I actually wrote a message in trading saying, guys, I'm taking the rest of the weekend off. This is too much for me. And maybe I should have stuck around and argued my point, and maybe things might have been different or whatever, but I needed that break for my own mental health, and I think Calurduran needed it too, and was advising other people to get that as well. So now that we had a little break, just to keep things chronological, then Joe comes back and he says, Valdo said we need 234,000 RPL per month to incentivize RPL liquidity. That's basically killed any semblance of the collateral argument. Haha. So then let's go on what happens next. Next we have Thomas come in just after midnight Eastern time, saying I have 2 questions, and Joe says you come to the right place. He says, who are the vocal pro PETH supporters other than Marcy? And I think there was a couple of people. Are there any strong arguments in favor of the flat ETH per validator other than it being a compromise? So then people did say that there were, and then Joe comes in and says there were, but they've been debunked. And then Zero says Joe, and Joe says yes. And he says, what did you end up voting on? And so then Jasper says the arguments are preserves collateral option range, makes a value commitment to abandoning PETH and nETH scaling. I think flat has unique value. And Patches said, I voted flat and was dunked out of it pretty quickly. And then Disby says, Yorick switch 2. Sneaky says, I voted for flat by becoming more open to nETH. And then Jasper said, my worry is that we'll lose market to SWICE by cautious users who see SWICE can let them take on low leverage, but Rocket Pool doesn't. And then Joe shared a screenshot here of his vote saying flat number of ETH per validator, 334 votes. So let's see. And then Joe says Waldorf's math is very hard to ignore, to argue with honestly. And Joe says not Copperhouse asked Joe, are you hard stuck on flat? And Joe says, not really. I'm listening to the debate and reserve the right to change my vote since that exists. Well, the debate is mostly the same thing over and over. I'm listening to market forces, haha. So then what happens is Jasper comes in a little while later and says, Welp, abandoning my support for flat over nETH. So Jasper is a very prominent member of the community. Like, he has like a position with the team, not like a formal position, but like, he's very, very well respected. And then 0x Patches asks him, how much vote have you got? And Jasper says, I don't. But I guess, it's symbolic that Jasper is shifting his position because people really do trust Jasper a lot on DeFi matters, on these kind of things. So that was that. And then Joe comes back a little while later and he says, angels and ministers of grace, defenders. And Disby says, what? And then he says, I hope you guys are right. And then A35U shares a screen capture of Joe changing his vote from flat to the NO ETH, node operator ETH, the 12 ETH max collateral. So Disby says, oh shit. And then at that point, the vote for node operator ETH overtakes the flat ETH for the first time since the voting began, because the flat ETH was like leading pretty much the whole time up to that point. So Joe was then Joe says it's not over yet. It'll take more than even Thomas to get the vote to get it set. So what happens next? Joe says some selling started. So I think what happened was, as you can see, these cells are coming through and the ratio was at like 0.0152 or so. Joe says basically I presented what I wanted the protocol to look like and it seemed like a good vision, but we can't reach there without some changes to things. So specifically, we can't use RPL as collateral to that degree based on the current liquidity and can't incentivize it enough to get to those levels. And I support the auction system. I suppose the auction system won't be able to fill that role either because of the extreme nature of that. However, that's fine. So then the cells start coming through. He says, when we get to a point where that's possible, I'll happily revisit and discuss raising the cap. And then the cells start happening and Joe has an unhappy face. And at this point, the IB1 gymnast, Evan, comes in and he says, unfortunately, this new proposal hurts RPL's tokenomics. So at this point, Joe changed his vote, right? And beforehand, he was warning that one of the reasons why he was voting for flat 24 was because there was this idea that people would sell and it would really hurt Rocket Pool, and people no one's going to sell, it's going to be minor, it's not going to be a big deal, like that kind of stuff. So Evan comes in and he says, unfortunately, this new proposal hurts RPL's tokenomics and monetary premium significantly. RPL is much less investable as an asset if 8/12 passes, so node operator ETH passes. I think I'll make a Twitter thread with more nuanced thoughts. So we'll likely see RPL take a hit if 8/12 passes. And Ramana says it's already priced in, and Evan says it's not even close. In my opinion, RPL will deflate for a while if you go 8/12. And he says, let's do some simple math. Say there's 1 million RETH minted. Let's say all those node operators at maximum collateral. Patches says you're going to have to do this math again because but at minimum collateral. So you have to do it a few times. And Evan says million R ETH divided by 24 ETHs worth of R ETH is roughly 40,000 mini pools. So if we have node operators, we have 12 ETHs worth of RPL. That's around 500,000 market cap, 500,000 ETH market cap for RPL in terms of fundamental demand. At a supply of 19 million, that's a 0.026 on the ratio. So Rocket Pool would have to scale significantly larger for the RPL ratio to do well in the long term. Here's the other unfortunate fact. Let me read that and then I'll get back to what Patches is saying. He says 1624 and 16/1.6 are essentially the same in terms of RETH supply. And he says wildly different in terms of Patches is having this discussion now. So let's actually go back. He says, okay, now do 1624, 16.1.6 and 8.2.4. Anything else is cherry picking preconditions to make a point. And then Evan says, I'm assuming Rocket Pool will be limited by interest in RETH and not node operators. And Patches says that's fine. It's the other omission that isn't. So then more cells are coming in. And Evan says, so let's say 1 million RETH is the mint cap. I'll run the numbers real quick. So let's get to his spreadsheet, and then let's get to the spreadsheet from Patches as well, which is right here. Okay, so this is like a little while later. They both provided their numbers and they got it here. Let me just move my video out of the way so you guys can see this. Okay. So what do we have on the screen? So there's 1 million RETH, 1 million node operator ETH staked at the current amounts, right? Bond size 1616. So this top two lines are where we stand right now. If everyone is at minimum collateral, we'd have 62,500 pools. The total TVL would be 100,000. So the ratio would be 0.005, which is about 60% down from where we are now, minimum. And then he says if everyone's at maximum at current amounts, then there'd be the value locked would be 1.5 million ETH worth of RPL locked, and then the value of that on the ratio would be 0.08 pretty much, which is like a 5x from where we were when this conversation was taking place. So there's a big, huge difference between people coming in at the minimum, people coming in at the maximum. So then Patches at the top here in the middle of the thing shared Evan's numbers about what that would look like, and the ratio for the minimum stayed the same, and then for the maximum it stayed the same as well, depending on, okay, for the maximum it stays the same. Let me start again. Okay, so the minimum, the first line of this middle section is at 2.4, which is the minimum. So if everybody went in at the minimum, what would the ratio look like? And at the ratio at 1 million RETH would be 0.005, which is the same as the one above, so it's 60% down. At 12, if everybody went in at the maximum collateral, then the ratio would be 0.026, which is about a 2x from where we are now, and a little bit less than that from when they were talking about this earlier. At 24, which is a flat, the ratio would be 0.052, which is like a 4x from where they were talking. And then at 36, it would be 0.08 pretty much, so 5x from where they were talking, or 6x. Yeah. And then at the bottom, we have the numbers from if there were 3 million RETH minted and 1 million node operators staked, and then numbers crunched then as well. And then at 2.4, the ratio would be pretty much where it was when they were talking, 0.015, and then basically as the collateral goes up, then the ratio goes up as well. So Evan's point is that by restricting the maximum collateral, you're reducing the potential value of the Rocket Pool token going up in the future, and making it much less desirable because the speculative premium would not exist at all, and then people wouldn't invest in the protocol thinking that they might gain from it later. I'm sorry, Evan, if I'm putting words into your mouth. And Patches says that this is still like a great gain, and I think that's kind of where the discussion was. Patches then went to bed. So I think I missed some of that conversation. Patches says more to illustrate that picking RETH demand limitation and max collateral is extreme cherry picking. Also, I don't think we're scaling to 3 million RETH, but you can't just pick 1 million as the dependent variable because it means less than half the nodes. Lol. So of course the ratio would be less. So they had this conversation back and forth for a while, and yeah, that discussion went on for quite a while. It was quite a rigorous discussion, and they didn't reach a conclusion. But this was some of the more technical discussions that were going on, and next we had this. On that note, then Patches concedes. On that note, assuming the limiting factor for RETH demand is assuming the limiting factor will be RETH demand, it's super bearish for RPL. So what Patches is saying here is, depending on what perspective you look at potential growth from, if it's restricted by RETH demand, meaning that people don't want to mint RETH, then it's definitely the bearish case for RPL. However, if you look at it from the node operator demand, then it's more bullish for RPL. So of course, that's vacillated between node operator demand and RETH demand for the last few months. So who knows how it's going to go going forwards. So yeah, I'm really sorry if I'm missing posts here because there's just too much information. So there might be some threads where, the narrative is not as smooth as it could be. So then Wanda comes in a few hours later and he says, I think RPL as a token is potentially a failed idea. Sadly, it was a great rallying tool to build a community, but I think it's causing more problems to Rocket Pool than it solves at this point. If governance doesn't want to directly create new value, let me fix my camera. Okay, so it says if governance doesn't want to directly direct newly created value to it, that is the first step to becoming a governance coin. I don't think we would have to go with PETH to fully avoid the fate of other governance tokens, but it's clear people are watching this vote and making investment choices accordingly. So this is at 10:20 in the morning. And he's saying, people are looking at this and they're making investment choices. Some of the sales had already been coming through overnight. It didn't impact the ratio too much, but there was a steady stream of selling coming through, some buying as well. But Patches says, I'll say it one more time, but the minimum stake going from 1.6 to 4.8 is bullish. That's more value directed to the token. And then Wanda comes back saying, it is my compensation, and currently most of my business is income in RPL token. I just sold my extra collateral based on this vote. So then Wanda says that, and then next there's a sale for 66 ETH, which is $104,000, and then the ratio went below 0.015, which is where Thomas's wall is. So now we're in a low liquidity environment. So that discussion went on. But at that point, I think the discussion was going on, and there was a lot of discussion happening. Wanda did, he held his own about arguing why he says, I went flat for many reasons, but the most important one is that we have to direct newly created value to Rocket Pool. I think both PETH and NETH are flawed, and moving to flat was the best move in the short term to prove that we weren't bound to a false dichotomy. And then he comes back and says, I already had 260% collateralization, so I just sold 110%. So he still has, 100 ETH more on top of that, ETH worth of RPL. He says, not really sure why people argued this wouldn't be done. All the whales are about to do this. Lots of people have already done this, about taking their liquidity that was there and selling it. So what then happens is, Noshua says, it doesn't matter if you dump your excess now or in 6 months for long-term value. But Wanda says, matters to my bottom line. I don't understand how anyone can be so focused on long-term future and ignore the reality today. I'm dumping and others will too. I'm considering exiting my mini pools to dump the rest. RPL ratio falling will destroy more wealth than my validators can create, even with RPL rewards. However, I think Wanda was mistaken here, and even if you exit your mini pools, your RPL tokens are not automatically available to you. So that was pointed out to him. And then he says, my ETH is locked, but my RPL would be freed if I exit. But then he was told that that's not the case. And he says, you can keep calling us all irrational, but I'm protecting my wealth while yours disintegrates. So, I think it was kind of refreshing for Wanda to come in and like defend the position, because there weren't that many people doing it over the course of the weekend, and for better or worse. And what happened was that I think Wanda was telling some home truths, about the fact that people are going to sell. And I've even on Rocket Fuel talked a few times about wanting to either sell or keep my RPL and, sell to make more mini pools or keep my RPL. And I'll be honest, right? One of the reasons why I stuck with such a large RPL position, 85% RPL and 50% ETH, is that, I was, not now I'm not. Now it's way less because the ratios come down so much. But one of the reasons why I stuck with RPL was thinking that when LEBs came around and when SAS came around, I'd be able to stake more of it and get rewards and use it as a collateral and like all that kind of stuff. But those arguments obviously can be made, like people have been making them all weekend, about the collateral stuff and about whether I'm selfish or not about wanting more rewards for myself. But so Wonder was talking about that, and then Patches was talking about there about value being directed to Rocket Pool and how it works. And that basically what started happening then is, let's go to the bot and let's go to that time in the morning, which is around 10 a.m. So this is the ping server, by the way. I don't think all of you have access to this. So right now, this is where Wonder's sale came in, right? So at 10:25 a.m. And the ratio before that was 0.01524. And the price was just under $25. So then the selling started, sell, buy, sell, buy, sell. Now the ratio by this point had already gone down to 0.013, which is a 15% decrease, and the price had gone down to $20, which is again like a 20% decrease pretty much. And at that point, I think the ratio leveled off at 0.01234. Let me see if I can find that for you all. And then it did. It came back up a little bit and then it went back down again. Let me see if I can find where that was. 0.0124, and here $19.50. So that's approaching like a 25% drawdown. And then it started to recover a little bit, and right now we're at 0.0138. So we're a good 10% down from where it was when Wanda sold. So the RPL price took a huge hit today, So let me have a look at the RPL on CoinGecko. Right, if we have a look at RPL ETH, then have a look. So overall, the price is down today. It started the day off at 0.0156, and it went down to 0.01234, pretty much. So it took a big hit, and then on the 30 days it's down 26%. And people were talking about how, once this discussion started, how the vote started, people started kind of like not being happy with where the direction was going and started selling. And that's like neither here nor there, but that was some of the points that people were making on the thing. So once the selling started, I think people started to get really toxic and like started to get yeah, well, let's just read what's happened here, right? So Destroyer says, one thing I want to bring up about the discussion that I don't think we should keep bringing up specific whales and what they may or may not do with their RPL stacks based on the outcome of the vote. Many of them are incredibly valuable to this project, and I'm sure that they have good reasons for their beliefs and the actions that will follow. They also are all human beings, and us sitting around criticizing them is dehumanizing. I can't imagine any of them want to sell, but if they feel it's the right thing to do, then it's their right. So at this point, a lot of people were kind of like turning on Marceau because he withdrew his excess RPL2, which was about 2,000 ETH worth of RPL at the time. Now it's worth less because the ratios come down. But he didn't sell anything. People were kind of like insinuating that it was a threat or a show of force. But like, you can only speculate because he never came out and said what he was going to do with it. As far as I know, maybe he did. I think he said that he might need to rebalance. I think I shared a tweet about that on Friday with Hani Abu, where Hani Abu asked him to give a valuation of where RPL will be in a few months' time. And he says it all depends on where this vote's going to be and like whether we can stop destroying value. So I'm not sure if he said that he was going to sell there or not. But he did mention, people either speculated or he mentioned something about rebalancing. I think it was people speculating. I don't think he mentioned it outright. But people were basically like really criticizing Marceau a lot. And like Destroyer felt it was unfair. I personally thought it was unfair. And that was a sentiment that was shared by a lot of people, that it was unfair. And then Joe, when he woke up in the morning, he said, I hope nobody's surprised by this. And I made this very clear that this was going to happen before I changed my vote. So one of the things that Joe talked about was that, the ratio was going to suffer, people were going to sell, and people like saying, Joe, don't worry about that. Like, it's not a big deal. Like, they're not going to sell. There's not that much to sell. But I don't think they realize just how illiquid RPL is below 0.15, because that's where Thomas's wall ends, and there's very thin liquidity below that. So the price dumped, right? Like, it was one of the single worst days that I've experienced being a rocket pool holder. It comes close to like around June time when the ratio really dropped a lot, but even then I think it was slower than what we saw today. But Joe said, I made this clear this was going to happen, and like this was the band-aid thing. Like, do you rip off the band-aid now and try to build back something later, or is this it? So yeah, he says, I made this very clear that it was going to happen before I changed my vote. And Zero says, I'm not surprised at all. And A35U says, if they dump on us now, they would have at some point in the future too. And Joe says, probably at a more sustainable pace, but eventually yes. And this is the band-aid ripping. So Zero says scab ripping, and I said that it's more like it's going to leave a scar. It's going to leave a really bad scar. And Wanda said, if only we had come up with some other use for RPL before doing this, maybe a staking as a service model, which has been delayed, right? The SAS was supposed to be in Atlas as well, but that got pushed back, where people can deposit ETH or RPL independently to fund a bunch of nodes. So, the team, they talked about it a few months ago. Langers said that, they want to hire, and they're going to try to hire 2 developers. So far, we have 0 developers. Maybe at that point, if there were 2 developers hired, we wouldn't have had to choose between LEBs or SAS. We could have had both ready for Atlas, but that's going off on a tangent. So yeah, if we had SAS ready, then the people who are thinking that, they have to sell now, they could have just waited for SAS and then staked their RPL into SAS, which is what I was thinking of doing as well. So one of the options that I was thinking of doing is like, I have excess RPL that was like above 150%. And I was thinking that I would be able to either run my own SAS or have it in someone else's SAS staking for me. So that obviously is not an option now. It probably won't be until next summer, most likely 6 months after Atlas comes out at the minimum. So yeah, it's a big issue. And then Meek says, I wish Eigenlayer was already available, as that could be a huge element to RPL utility. And people were then talking about how we might be able to try to give, well, I don't know what, like, yeah, they were just talking about dreams basically. And he says, Joe says, because this can be explored again later and it's not like this is a set it forever moment, I believe that continuing to innovate and make the protocol stronger will ultimately be the winning move. So I'm going to do my best to tune the rest of this out and focus on building Atlas and beyond. So Joe said, basically, you guys like peace out. I'm gonna go and actually work, and Yeah, and I said, stay healthy, Joe. I hope you stay well. And Joe says, happy Halloween. And, Joe was like kind of done with it, right? Like, it was, these last few days have been really, really draining for a lot of people in the community, myself included. And yeah, here we are. So Meek comes in later and he says, I know you're joking, but this villain characterization of Marcy needs to stop. That's what I was mentioning a little while ago about how people kind of like villainizing Marceau and like saying if Marceau dumps or if we do this or if we do that. And then like, people actually saying like, we need to stop this. Marceau's a very valuable member of the community. He's done a lot to promote Rocket Pool. He's done a lot. He's invested like his life savings pretty much into Rocket Pool, a big chunk of them, like, which is millions of dollars, hundreds of mini pools, like hundreds of thousands of RPL. Like, this guy was invested, right? Like, stop being arseholes, pretty much. Like, calm the F down. So this was quite a common sentiment as well. People saying like, chill, like, stop with the Marcy hate, because it's just not cool. So then Thomas basically was. So I didn't really talk about Thomas much, right? But Thomas was kind of vacillating as well over the course of the weekend, thinking like, he put his vote forward for flat 24 and then was saying, I'm willing to be persuaded, and people made arguments with him and he was like, semi-convinced. So then a little while later he made this comment, and let me just move my thing out of the way if you want to read it. Actually, I'm just going to read it all out to you. So he says, I'm keeping my vote flat for flat number of ETH per validator. I'm pretty disappointed in general with the way the community has handled this whole decision. The governance process was rushed and put to a snapshot way before all of the options had been thoroughly discussed. I understand the time pressure and realize it was somewhat unavoidable. Though through the discussions, we have become diverse and cruel to some of the most active supporters of the protocol. We're all invested in and want the best for Rocket Pool. We're competing against some well-funded teams, and our enthusiastic community is our best chance of being a long-term winner in the LSD game. I think we should all take a step back and work to understand each other better and make sure our community is actively behind whatever we do. This vote itself seems fairly inconsequential. LEB8s are a huge upgrade no matter what. Ideologically, I still support the Node ETH Max, but I've been forced into trying to make up my mind with limited information in a short amount of time. The way I see it, it makes the most sense to vote for flat ETH to maintain the peace in the short term while we more consciously decide the best route forward. We should do to each other the courtesy of not burning down the community over a rash decision and accept a compromise while we hash it out with civility. So that's what Thomas posted, and Thomas obviously is one of the bigger whales in the community. He has 850 mini pools. He has a million RPL tokens staked. Like, he's in it. You know what I mean? Like, this is his biggest bet, and he's kind of upset, right? And he wasn't happy about this, and perfectly understandable. And then Calurduran comes in and says, I pretty much agree with all of that, and it captures my thoughts well. The one thing I do have to disagree with slightly is that the best options were either take a vote on this now or not include LEB8s in Atlas. We can bemoan the fact that people in the community don't push for this to be resolved earlier, but that's a broader issue with a very small number of people we currently have actively pushing governance forward. And then Patches says this too reasonable to post here right now. And yeah, so then what's next? Next we have then Thomas writes that post, right, saying he's upset, and then he went and he staked another 101,000 RPL tokens for a total value of 1,500 ETH. So, even though he's showing his disapproval with the community, even though he's not happy with the governance, even though there's a lot that Thomas is upset about, he's still gesturing that he supports Rocket Pool, he supports the team, well, not the team, the community, I guess, the protocol as a whole, and he did that by putting more money into here, right? Like, that is worth, I don't even want to know, like $2 million, like 2.5 million dollars or something like that. So Thomas is putting his money where his mouth is, right? And like, that's really wonderful that, there's still that sense of wanting best by the protocol among the whales and in the community. So where does that bring us now? So this was as of an hour ago when I started recording. I can't believe this video is 53 minutes. it says max effective stake for LEB8. So this is a vote from Snapshot. So this was as of an hour ago, but I'll bring up the latest information after this. Actually, let me just bring up the latest information now, but that's a little bit more accurate. So where we stand right now is we have 55.6% of votes, 4,300 votes go to scale with node operator ETH, and 3,900 votes, or 50.63%, going to flat number of ETH. And then the protocol ETH, the 36 ETH option, is pretty much dead in the water, and that shows with like Marcy adding flat number as his second choice. So as an approval choice. So let's just discuss the vote for a second, and then I'm gonna wrap this up, try to get in under an hour. So for the first day until last night, basically the flat number of ETH was leading, and then Joe voted in line. He switched his vote, and that swung a big way, because Joe has 335 votes. I think at the time he had nearly 400 votes, but then he's lost some of his voting power by people delegating away from him, which is perfectly fine. So Joe swung the vote basically, and that reduced the flat ETH's vote by 335, increased scale with node operator ETH at 4,300 votes now. So that's where we stand right now, right? So we still have another 4 days to go of this, and I have a feeling that it's going to stay quite contentious in the community until that time. I don't think people are going to calm down or anything like that. The passions are still running too high. Maybe it'll calm down. I hope I'm wrong, but I guess we'll find out. But I think a lot of people have voted already, and the only thing that would potentially change things now is if either Patricio came and voted, which he said that he's not interested in voting, but that might change, or if someone who has voted for node operator ETH then changes their vote and goes back to flat ETH. So that's where we stand right now. I guess we'll see how it goes. So I know that I've definitely missed a lot of stuff. So if you were making a point and I didn't cover it, I'm sorry about that. If there's some jumps in narrative, I'm sorry about that. I literally have recorded for pretty much 56 minutes right now, and I'm tired. And this was like so emotionally draining for me to do this work over the weekend. Like, it was really, really, really tough. And I've been working on this pretty much like all day, except for a few hours in the middle, and it's been a lot. So if I missed anything, I'm sorry. If I presented anyone's position incorrectly, I'm sorry. Please understand it was not of any kind of wanting to spread misinformation. I tried to be as honest as possible, as reflecting like the course of actions, the course of events. And and I try to keep my opinion out as much as possible as well. I know that it crept in there some places, but I really hope we can come back stronger from this, because today was a bad day, right? Like, it was a really, really bad day in the community, not just because of the price, but because of the division, because of the anger, because of the frustration, because of people felt they were bullying. Well, not bullying, but like, there was dogpiling happening. There was people talking in very passionate tones that they thought, but maybe other people thought it was aggressive in a sense, or confrontational, and that's all a shame, right? And I know that it's worse in other communities, but I don't care about the communities. I'm part of this community, and I give literally hours of my life every day to this community, because it wasn't like this before. So I hope that we can go back to what we were like, but sadly I think we've got a few more days of this ahead while this vote is still going. I will try to talk about other things, because there's still other things happening. I will try to talk about other things tomorrow and just touch on this briefly, because I've literally talked about this for an hour today. So thank you for watching. If you've stuck with this the whole time, you deserve a POAP or something, but I don't have one, so sorry about that. I will be giving out POAPs for October contributors. I need to do that. I'll put it on my list of things to do tomorrow. So if you made any contribution to the Rocket Fuel this last month, you'll be getting a POAP for that. So cool. Thank you for helping. Sorry, I really need some water. I don't have any. I'm going to wrap it up here. I hope you all had a good weekend. I hope you all have a great week ahead, and I'll see you all tomorrow. Bye.